Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue on and talk a little bit more detail about some of the functions of the skin. Now, some of the functions of the skin I've already covered in previous lectures, and then also I couldn't resist covering some of it during the anatomy portion as well. But we're going to talk about a few more details about the function of the integumentary system here. Incidentally, if you're hearing sound effects in the background, I am obviously recording from home today, and our air conditioning is out, so we've got all the windows open, and a thunderstorm is coming through. So if you hear thunder, you hear rain, hopefully it's not interfering with the lecture sound, because if so, I'll have to go back and record the whole thing over again. All right, so major function of the integumentary system is to provide a barrier between the inside of the body and the outside of the body. We've already discussed that to great degree. Let's talk about it, but we haven't so much talked to put it all together, like what are the different components of the barrier. So you have, the skin actually has 3 different types of barriers going on there to offer you several different levels of protection. So you have chemical barriers, and what we mean by this is chemicals in the skin that are serving as a barrier to certain things. And so the chemical barriers of the skin include low pH secretions. All right, so the sebum, your skin oil, we've already talked a little bit about how that has, it has lipids in it. It's oil. Oils are lipids. So lipids contain fatty acids. Fatty acids have a lower pH. So you secrete this sebum on the surface of your skin. Now, it's not a super low pH, but it's lower than normal human body fluid pH, which hopefully you remember is 7.35 to 7.45, 7.45. A little bit lower than that on the surface of your skin. And so what that does is it helps prevent overgrowth of skin bacteria. You certainly have bacteria on the skin, but because of the slightly lower pH, that's not optimal for a lot of bacteria to grow either. And so because of that, you tend not to have overgrowth of bacteria on the skin. Now believe me, you've got plenty of bacteria on the skin. You will cover that in more detail when you take microbiology. But if we didn't have the sebum there, the bacteria would be there having a big party. And you also have, there are certain kinds of proteins called defensins. Those are types of proteins that are made in the skin, and they kill some types of bacteria or inhibit their growth. So those are chemical barriers there, because one of the main jobs of your skin is to protect you from attack by microscopic organisms like bacteria. All right, then you actually have physical mechanical barriers. All right, so just the structure itself or the properties that those structures have block things from moving in or out of the body. So as we've already talked about, those physical and mechanical barriers include the keratin protein fibers that you have in the stratum corneum, and those glycolipids that we talked about that fill in the spaces between all those dead cells that are full of those keratin fibers in the stratum corneum. And lipids are waterproof. They hate water. So the glycolipids provide waterproofing. Waterproofing of the skin is very important. You don't want your own body fluids evaporating easily through your skin, and you also don't want to take up water, because then you wouldn't look too pretty after you took a bath if you were soaking up tons and tons and tons of water through the surface of your skin. All right, also the keratinized stratum corneum with those glycolipids there keeps water-soluble substances out, so hydrophilic things can't get through there because they hate those glycolipids. Now, things that are lipid-soluble, things that do like lipids, you can take up through the skin. Those are called lipid-soluble substances. And a good example of something like that, maybe you've heard before that it's actually an oil in the poison ivy plant that triggers the reaction that your body may have to it if you're allergic to poison ivy. and that's called an oleoresin. So it's on the poison ivy leaves. That is a hydrophobic substance, so it is able to penetrate those the keratin glycolipid barrier of the skin, and you can absorb that inside. Organic solvents, for example, things like turpentine that you might use to clean up oil-based paints, that's an organic solvent that's hydrophobic, and you can absorb that through your skin. There are some salts, heavy metals, things like mercury that you can actually absorb through the skin that get past the barrier. There are some types of drugs, like the types of drugs you can take in through a patch. For example, birth control patches have hormones in them that are hydrophobic, and those can be absorbed through the skin. So hydrophobic things can be absorbed. Then you have your biological barriers, and those are cells that function as guardians in the skin to help fight off microorganisms that are trying to invade the body. We've talked about those already. Those include dendritic cells and macrophages. Both of those do phagocytosis and digest microorganisms that are trying to invade the body. So all those are your three components of the barrier function of the skin. All right, a little bit more. We've talked about this before too. We talked about it in Unit 1. Body temperature regulation is an important function of the skin. All right, and that is mainly due to perspiration, activation of those eccrine sweat glands. When they get activated, they secrete sweat onto the surface of the skin. As that sweat on the surface of your skin evaporates, evaporation of water actually uses heat. It takes heat to make that happen. And you know that, like water on a cold day doesn't evaporate off of the sidewalk nearly as quickly as if you have a warm day. That's because the water has to absorb heat to actually evaporate and convert from a liquid to a gas. So when sweat evaporates from the surface of your skin, it's actually using your body heat to do that. So it helps remove some of your body heat. It helps dissipate some of your body heat. All right, so believe it or not, about 500 milliliters per day. A milliliter is a half a liter. Oh, I'm sorry, 500 milliliters is a half a liter. A milliliter is 1/1000th of a liter. So if you think about a 2-liter bottle, about a fourth of a 2-liter bottle of perspiration per day actually gets released onto the surface of your skin and evaporates without you even knowing it. That's called insensible perspiration. You don't realize that that's going on, and that's just part of maintaining your normal body temperature homeostasis. You have those minor fluctuations in body temperature occurring all the time, and one of the major ways that's controlled is through this insensible perspiration. So you lose about 500 milliliters of your body fluid per day through that. Now obviously when you get really hot, like you're exercising or it's a hot day, you have increased sweat gland activity. And you guys know that, of course. So you're going to lose even more of that fluid, more fluids evaporating on the surface of your skin that dissipates even more body heat. Another thing that happens to help you control your body temperature, which is important, dilation of dermal blood vessels. Dilation of dermal blood vessels. So when you were looking at the diagrams of the skin, well, while you were studying the skin anatomy, you saw those blood vessels passing through there. All right, so if those blood vessels dilate, that means that they expand in size. So if that happens, you're going to have increased blood flow to the superficial parts of the body near the surface of the skin. You're going to have more blood flow into the dermis. All right, so blood that ordinarily would be down deeper in your body and holding on to your your body heat would now be arriving near the surface where some of that heat can dissipate. That heat can radiate out of the blood and into the surrounding air. So that's another thing that your body does to help cool itself off. That's called vasodilation, is another name for that. That's something you guys should know. Vasodilation. That means dilation of blood vessels. You know that's going on. If you have a lighter skin tone, you'll see your skin turn red in color. That's because of the increased blood flow near the surface. That's what you're seeing. Anytime you see red skin, you've got increased blood flow at that location. That's why it's turning red. All right, now the reverse of that is called vasoconstriction. If you get really cold and your body needs to heat itself up, those blood vessels are going to constrict. You're going to have less blood flow to the surface. That's going to keep your blood down deeper inside your body where it can stay warm, and that helps preserve warm blood and warmer temperatures for your deeper, more major organs, which are more critical than your skin for survival. Also, when you get cold, sweat gland activity is inhibited. The nervous system tells those eccrine sweat glands, hey, quit making so much sweat. We don't need sweat evaporation going on at the surface. So that's how these structures in the skin help control body temperature. All right, a third major function of the skin, cutaneous sensations. Cutaneous, again, is another term referring to the skin because the skin can be called a cutaneous membrane, and those include temperature sensations, touch sensations, pain sensations. You guys know those nerve endings that we saw on the microanatomy diagrams of the skin. You have different versions of those nerve endings that have different jobs, sensing those types of things. And those are absolutely vital for your survival. Imagine if you couldn't sense temperature and you wouldn't realize maybe that you were touching flames, and you would severely injure yourself. It would be very difficult to survive if you did not have cutaneous sensations. Again, here's our generic skin chunk diagram again. And so, just as a reminder, you have these little nerve endings where you see these little yellow fibers, and they make all those little branches. And they extend to a number of those skin appendages or skin accessory structures. And so they control some of those things, but then you have some of them that are involved in these various sensations that we have as well. All right, hang on, had a little bit of momentary difficulty there. Got an iPad going, computer going, webcam going, screen recording software going, and sometimes they don't all get along. All right, so some additional functions of the integumentary system. This is a very important one. Vitamin, you've probably heard before that your skin makes vitamin D, and that is true. Vitamin D is made as a precursor, so that means it is like an immature form of vitamin D. It hasn't become activated yet. So vitamin D is a molecule. It's an organic type molecule that has lots of little ring-shaped structures in it. And so in the skin, what it means is it's a precursor because it doesn't have its fully mature pattern of atoms that are linked together properly to make it functional. So it actually has to travel from the skin to the liver and the kidneys to become fully functional. And what vitamin D does is, among other things, but one of the major things that it does is it causes increased calcium uptake by your small intestine. So it functions as a chemical messenger, essentially a hormone, that tells the cells in your small intestine along the lining there, hey, absorb more calcium from the diet. The body needs more calcium here. So vitamin D is pretty important, and it is made in the skin, requires UV light in order to happen. So ultraviolet light is necessary for the chemical reactions. You know, UV light's pretty powerful. It's a source of energy, so it provides some of the energy that's needed to manufacture vitamin D in the skin. That's why if you don't get good sun exposure, you'll have lower amounts of vitamin D in the body. You might have to take vitamin D supplements to make sure that you have enough, because if you don't, you won't take up enough calcium from your diet, and then that affects many of your body systems can have problems if you don't have enough calcium, including your bones. So vitamin D is pretty important. A really interesting thing to think about with regard to vitamin D, you need that ultraviolet light. And what did we say in the skin is actually a shield from ultraviolet light? Remember that? Melanin. The melanin that the melanocytes makes in the skin gets transferred into the keratinocytes that are in the stratum spinosum and the epidermis, and that is protecting the DNA of those cells from ultraviolet light so that the DNA doesn't get damaged, because that can actually cause those cells to die or become cancerous. So if you have a lot of melanin in your skin, you have a darker skin tone, that's blocking UV light, which makes it more difficult for your skin to manufacture vitamin D. So you've got kind of a trade-off there. If you have darker skin, you're more protected from skin cancer, but you're not quite as good at manufacturing vitamin D in your skin because you've got all that shielding in that location. All right, another thing that your skin can do, it can function as a blood reservoir. So about 5% of your body's blood volume, your overall blood volume, you have several liters of blood in your body, and about 5% of that is up in the dermis of the skin, or can be up in the dermis of the skin. That gets into vasodilation, vasoconstriction, like we were talking about. So if all those blood vessels are dilated, you have more of this blood flow up into the dermis of the skin, into these superficial areas of the body. If you're cold, those blood vessels constrict, and so that blood moves out of that reservoir and stays down in deeper parts of the body to help keep you warm. That also plays a role in, believe it or not, controlling your blood pressure, which you'll learn about in Biology 202. A sixth function of the skin is excretion, and again, that's a term for release of wastes. So you actually do really, now most of your waste you're going to excrete through your urine and your feces, but you do actually excrete some wastes through your sweat, and those include nitrogenous wastes. Those come from catabolism. Remember that? Catabolism, breakdown of proteins and nucleic acids. That's where those come from. When those molecules get broken down, they have nitrogens in them, so they're called nitrogenous wastes, the molecules that come from the breakdown when your body needs to get rid of them. And you'll actually excrete some of those in your sweat. Salt, you guys know you have sodium chloride, NaCl. You know your sweat tastes salty as well. All right, just briefly, what happens when we get older? All right, so when you get older, so by now you probably realize, hey, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the skin. The skin is very active. Skin activity, what does that require? It requires metabolism, right? When your cells are active, they are harnessing energy from nutrients. They're using that energy to power all of these things that they need to do. Like if you're a fibroblast in the dermis, you've got to make collagenous fibers. You've got to make elastic fibers to help maintain that tissue. If you're a cell down in the stratum basale of the epidermis, you need energy so that you can divide and keep replacing the skin cells on up farther in the more superficial layers of the epidermis. So skin activity requires lots of metabolism. Metabolism, in order to be running properly, you got to have nutrients like sugars, and you need O2. We need oxygen gas. All right, where do these things come from? They come from the blood. You've got to have a good blood supply to the skin. So as you get older, you might start to develop heart disease, which cuts off some of the blood flow to the skin. Some of your blood vessels in the skin may decay and break down over time as you get older. And as you get older, it's very difficult to more difficult to replace those types of things. And so your skin just does not have the blood supply that it once did, so it can't be quite as active. So because of that, your epidermal replacement slows down. You know, the stratum basale, the cells aren't multiplying. They're not doing mitosis as quickly. So as the older dead skin cells get sloughed off, they're not being replaced as quickly. Your skin becomes thin, dry, and itchy. The epidermis is getting thinner. The dermis can actually get thinner as well. The skin gets dry and itchy because your sebaceous glands are not as active anymore. All these things are slowing down, so you're not producing as much skin oil. You guys know older people, their skin gets thinner. Elasticity decreases. All right, that comes from elastic fibers, right? So fibroblasts are the cells in the dermis that make those. If those cells are not being replaced as they age, or they're just slowing down because they don't have the nutrients and the oxygen gas that they used to have, they're not going to be able to manufacture those elastic fibers. So your skin becomes less elastic. It doesn't rebound back into place. And we all know that as you age, your skin begins to sag. You may lose some of your subcutaneous fat over time as you get older, and that leads to cold intolerance. Remember, lipids provide insulation, so you're not going to be as tolerant to the cold if you have less fat. Wrinkles, you know, you lose that elasticity in your skin, it becomes wrinkled. Also, you lose collagen fibers, so it's easier for you to tear the skin because you don't have as much collagen in the skin, so it's easier to tear it and rip it because you don't have that tensile strength in the skin. Your blood vessels in the skin, the ones that are there, become thinner. It's easier to break them, and that's when you develop a bruise. So there are lots of things that go on during old age, and they're going to occur in all of us as we get older. Also, as you get older, another important thing, you have an increased risk of skin cancer because you have fewer melanocytes making melanin, shielding you from the ultraviolet light of the sun. So because of that, you're more likely to have skin cells that become cancerous due to that ultraviolet light exposure. And we're actually going to have a separate little lecture on skin cancer right after this one. Talk about that in a little bit more detail because that's an important homeostatic imbalance of the skin. All right, so I just wanted to hit a few highlights there about aging of the skin and why it happens. Our next video lecture, we're going to discuss the major types of skin cancer. Very important topic for human health. Skin cancer is a big problem in healthcare in the United States, as I'm sure many of you guys know. So we'll spend a few minutes talking about that in the next video lecture.